Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to Iron Anchor Cycles and part 2 of our Sportster chopper project. So you may remember the mighty Sportster here in all its glory, stripped down to bare bones and with almost nothing left on it from the last video. If you missed that first one, I will leave a link right up here so that you can go find that video and get caught up and watch the disassembly. But if you're all caught up, well, let's start getting going on this next part. So you will notice, I suppose, the only thing different from how we left it when we left it in the last video was the wheels are different. Now, no, this is not me saying we're gonna be running these old crappy laced wheels that I had just lying upstairs on the rack. They're on here just so we can move the frame and front end, I guess, the roller around the shop while the other wheels, we're figuring out what we're gonna do with them. So we are gonna be running the original 13-spoke mags on this bike. I was hoping that after I got the tires off, I could kind of put them in the parts washer, clean them up, try and polish them a little bit to get them I wanted them to just be raw and clean. I thought that would look really cool on this bike. Unfortunately, they're a little bit pitted, they're not quite perfect, and I just don't think they're good enough to run in the condition they're in. So I was hoping maybe I could get them polished and get that fixed. It wound up being prohibitively expensive and also just a little bit difficult to find somebody to do it. So I'm gonna go with the backup plan, which is getting them powder coated. So really, you know, there's nothing bad to say about a set of gloss black 13-spoke Harley mags. They look awesome. I'm looking around the shop here. I see 3 bikes with them right in front of me. That is kind of why I didn't want to do it. It's just that it's really common. Now, there's a reason it's common because it looks really good, but I was hoping on this bike to do something a little bit different, but we are where we are. So those wheels are out getting powder coated now. And of course, if I find something different, I can always swap them down the road. You know, having a nice clean set of gloss black mags can do anything we want with those. If I find another set of wheels that are better for this, can always change them down the road. So wheels are off getting done. And while that's happening, we're gonna get this frame ready. So the hardtail section has come in. We only had to wait a couple of weeks for that. So it's here now. So we're gonna get rolling on this. I don't know exactly what my kind of steps and order is gonna be here to do this, but I guess what we're gonna do is I'll get the front end removed. I think I'm gonna leave the rear wheel on for right now just to, you know, help the thing stay balanced. But we'll get a little bit of disassembly done. We'll do a little bit of measuring, figure out where we need to cut this, and then we'll be ready to start looking at the hardtail section and getting it installed. I'll talk about which hardtail we used and why I picked the one I picked when I go grab that and bring it over here. So if you're interested in that, stick around and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But for now, let's get into getting this frame cut. Okay, so front end removed. It's real simple once all the other stuff's already been taken off. Just looking at this, because it's always curious to take a look at the neck bearings in these bikes because really nobody ever does until you get to doing a big disassembly like this. So you can see a couple of quintessential things here. The first of which should be obvious, is this big glob of grease right here on the stem. So where that comes from is the little Zerk fitting that's installed on here. And obviously you can see it doesn't do anything. I don't know why those are even there. They don't work. The only way you would actually repack these bearings with grease would be if you actually filled the entire thing with grease and then it started pushing, you know, in between the rollers on the bearings or into the cage. You're never gonna put that much grease in there. And if you did, I can't even imagine what a mess it would make. There are definitely some good globs of grease in there from somebody having done that, but you can see here, these bearings are decent in terms of the amount of grease that's on here. I'm feeling the grease when I spin them around. So the bearings are actually, doesn't look like they're damaged, which is pretty unusual. Usually when you see a bike of this age, it doesn't have a ton of miles on it, but even still, these bearings are usually long gone. So kind of nice to see that this one is still in good shape. We're gonna replace them anyway because it's inexpensive and we're here. So when the time comes down the road, we'll knock the races out, we'll put a new set of bearings top and bottom. So all this is gonna get cleaned up, the stuff we're reusing, and then we'll come back to this stuff at a later chapter once the frame is ready. But just wanted to show you guys that. So I'm gonna, just to avoid a little bit of mess down the road, I'm gonna try and get as much of this grease out of here as I can and clean this up. And then we'll start looking at what we gotta do to make our cuts. Okay, so with the frame all ready to go, I took one additional step, and hopefully you can see it on the camera here. I put some lines. We've got one here, and then we've got one on each of the lower tubes. And these are gonna be our cut lines to get the frame cut in half. So pretty straightforward deal. I measured from the very front edge of the neck down the backbone, 16 inches. And then for the lower measurements, I measured on the hardtail from the motor mount forward to where the end of the frame tube is. And that measurement, in my case, I think it was 4 5/8 of an inch. And then I transferred that measurement, put the T-square on here the same way, and kind of show you that. Just put that on here like this and transferred that measurement down onto the frame. So we're pretty much ready to cut at this point. Now, a couple little details, and obviously I'm not doing a how-to here. There are plenty of videos from all the manufacturers of these hardtails that'll show you how to install theirs, and they're gonna show you the best way to do it, presumably. But just a couple of kind of general call-outs that I'll throw out here. Obviously, whenever you're doing something like this, it's easier to cut a little bit fat and then use a grinder or whatever to come down and straighten and flatten and do what you need to do. So the way I drew these lines, the exact measurement is on the forward side of each of these lines, and the lines are pretty fat. So what I'm gonna do is make my cuts on the opposite side of the line, and then I'll have that, 1/8 of an inch or whatever it is to be able to come in and gradually straighten and flatten with the grinder. You don't wanna cut too much off. It's not probably the end of the world if you do. You can always add metal. I mean, if you've got a welder, you can make things longer. Anything can be fixed, really, but it's much easier to take more metal away than it is to add it back in. So that's what we're gonna do. So there's probably any number of ways you can employ to make these cuts. They're just, metal tubing. Anything even down to a hacksaw by hand would do it. In our case, I'm gonna go grab my portaband from in the other room because I think that's gonna be the cleanest, easiest, straightest, least amount of sparks flying around the shop method of doing this. So let me go get situated with that. We'll get the camera rolling and positioned, and we'll film making some cuts here. Point of no return. All right, well, the first two cuts were a little sketchy. The first one I made real crooked. I just relied on the guard on here to keep this straight, and that did not work. The second one, I cut much straighter, although on that second cut started to get away from me because not using the guard, it wants to pull the saw in. So maybe we can find the best of both worlds on this one. And for what it's worth, part of the nice thing about cutting it fat is, yeah, I made a really gnarly crooked cut on that, but all it means is just a little bit more grinding because all the error is on the wasted side. So, c'est la vie. I think I found the magic on how to do this. That one actually looks really nice. If I had another one of these bikes to do, I could definitely do all three nicely. All right. Well, it's not much of a frame we're keeping, but that's what's left of this bike. I like that. I think that's pretty good. All right, well, here's what's left of our frame. I figured our best course of action was, because it's so small and portable now, I could just pick it up and bring it inside into our dirty room, if you will, and do all the grinding and sanding and all that in here and not worry about getting metal bits and particles all over the rest of the shop. So we've got a bunch of different tasks we've got to do here before we're ready to get this fitted up to the hardtail. The first of which is grinding down the cuts I made. The first one is pretty good. The second one is all right. The first cut's pretty gnarly, like I mentioned. So I'm going to start off with just a regular grinding disc. Probably move maybe to like a flap disc, see how this goes. Get them nice and even and smooth and parallel. And then I've got a little like machinist square here so that we can check to make sure that they are true all the way around. Once that's done, we'll take a little like sanding drum, come on the inside of each of these, clean up any rust that's in here, the seam from where the pipe was originally made, get that all nice and smooth. We'll put a chamfer on the outside to make the welding as strong as possible. And then I guess in addition, and we'll probably have to do this before, now that I think about it, before we do the sanding on the inside, we do have to drill holes through each of these tubes for the plug welds. And obviously that's going to leave burrs behind on the inside when we do that. So we'll need to use a little drum sander to clean that up too. So just kind of going in no particular order here and we'll see how it goes. All right, well, it's our initial kind of roughing in of bringing these down and getting them a little closer to straight. Definitely, I'm gonna have some more work to do, but these are looking a lot better than they were before. So I will keep taking my little measurements and we'll just kind of come back and just keep working them until they're all straight and parallel. And then probably the next thing I'll do after that, do the chamfers on the outside. And then maybe we'll move to drilling the holes. All right, well, I think we are pretty much there, at least for our initial test fit. So got our cuts nice and even, nice little bevel around the outside of each. Got our holes drilled for our plug welds. So we got one on each side here, and then we've only got one on each side on the outside here. Got those seams grinded off nicely, holes cleaned up on the inside. Yeah, I think we're ready to just blow this thing off, bring it back out there, and hopefully try a test fit and see what happens. All right, I actually forgot one step, which is we still got to take the paint off here. Obviously, we could do that once we get it on, but it'll be easier to move it around like this. So I've just got a little Scotch-Brite fine pad. Obviously, I'm not trying to take metal off. I just want to keep them as round as possible and just remove the paint. So I'm going to give it a shot with this. All right, so obviously we've got our front half of the frame here prepped, and now a first look at the hardtail. So again, I mentioned, I'll talk about whose hardtail this is and all the details about it once we get it all together, because it doesn't really matter for the purposes of what we're doing now. Putting a frame together is putting a frame together. So hopefully, if we've done our measurements correct, our cutting correct, and our prep correctly, this should slide together with a little bit of persuasion, but hopefully nothing crazy. And we'll be able to hopefully see what this frame is going to look like. So, you want to give me a hand? Well, I think we just have to stand on opposite sides. So we want to go like a little bit at a time. So I guess we could start, well, maybe we'll try the top first. And, ooh.
There you go.
All right, now, don't go any further there. That's a good start.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get a little bit of this. Actually,
oh yeah.
Boom. Okay, well, I expected that to at least have a little bit of effort. Now, obviously one could argue that if the tolerances are not good here, like if we ground a whole bunch off or if they make these slugs too small, obviously it's going to go together easily. But we didn't. I didn't grind a whole bunch. Let's switch these pieces of wood. I didn't grind a whole bunch when we were doing that. There we go. I like that. Sorry, I didn't grind a whole bunch of material out on the inside, and the slugs are definitely a pretty precise fit. So we've got a gap, which is what we're looking for. So what they do is they stick a little tack weld on the edge of each of these so that you can't push it all the way together. So you leave a gap, so you have a nice weld surface there. So between the little bevel we cut and the groove, I think this is going to weld together really nicely. So our next step, which is a little scary because the frame is not really being held together by anything, our next step is to get the motor into here. And the idea there is that the motor itself, between the motor mounts, most importantly here, 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 and here, the motor mounts will act as a jig to get the frame aligned the way it needs to be. And then you can go ahead and start getting it welded. So that's our next step, is throwing the motor in here. So let's do it. Okay, round two. So I forgot a crucial step, which is there's a little strap TIG welded or tack welded onto the rear section of the frame. They do that for shipping so it doesn't get bent or twisted, I guess. I forgot to cut that off. So obviously the motor's not going to drop in. So now, hopefully, we can get this. All right. Well, that's a lot better than it went last time. Well, that just goes right in when the shipping strap's not in there. All right, so our dowels are in. So now the job is to start the hardware, get all the motor mounts started. So we've got, most importantly, the rear, the front, the bottom, and the top. So the idea here is to get it all started, and then we'll tighten it up in that order I just said. And then the motor will kind of hold the frame where it needs to be, and then hopefully we can start to weld it. So let's grab some hardware and get this bad boy bolted in here. All right, so got all of our hardware started, and things are looking pretty good. Actually, you know what? I did forget one. We didn't get the top one on yet, but we got the rest of them. So the kit doesn't come with hardware for the rear, and the OE bolts are too long. So I had some spare hardware lying around. I'll get some nicer stuff down the road, but this is good enough for now. So we got these in here loose. Then we went and did the top mount in the front, put the bottom mounts in, and now we just have to do the this middle mount, which doesn't do a whole lot in this scenario, but we'll get it in there. Once I have them all in loosely, I'm gonna start snugging them up. We'll start here, then we'll come here, and then finally here. You'll notice there's this ratchet strap on here. This was my attempt, because the frame, was sort of moving, was to get the frame kind of pulled in as tight as it'll go to get the holes to line up. So for the moment, I'm just gonna leave it on here until we get all the hardware tightened. And then once the hardware's tightened, I'll see where we're at. We'll check the straightness on the backbone. Maybe I'll leave this on, maybe I'll take it off, I don't know. But once we get all the hardware tightened down, it's gonna be time to start welding. So we'll check back with you when we're gonna do that. All right, well, I got all the hardware tightened down, got that ratchet strap taken off. Everything looks really good. The last little gut check we did was putting a straight edge across the backbone here to make sure that it's straight, and it is. So we're ready to weld. So we've got really nice little grooves here with the little tacks they left and the chamfer we made. And we've got obviously access to our plug welds as well. So that is gonna be a project for tomorrow because right now it's time to go home and get some dinner. So I guess we'll be right back for you guys, and for me tomorrow, we're gonna weld this thing up, so stick around. All right, well, I was on vacation for a week, and now I'm back and ready to get back into getting this frame finished up. So where we left off was probably only about a few seconds ago for you guys, but for me it was about a week, so I'm just trying to remember here. Pretty sure we got the motor bolted in, the frame locked down where it needs to be, and we gotta start doing our welding. So I got everything cleaned up here and got prepped for that, and we are gonna start welding it today. So I am not gonna undertake that task myself. While I do possess some basic welding skills and definitely have the right welder here to do it, I just don't trust myself on welds as critical as this. They're structural, holding the whole frame together. Just as easy to have a friend come over and give me some help. Know lots of people with far better welding skills than I have, so we've got the equipment here, so easy just to have somebody come over and give me a hand. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. So I'm just getting ready for him to get here, and as soon as he does, we're gonna start knocking this out, and we'll have a full frame once again. So kind of following general procedure and the instructions that you get with the kit, we are going to do as much welding as we can on all 3 spots, and then once that's done, we'll pull the motor out and finish welding everything else. So rather than just the kind of normal thing you would do, which would be to, just put some tacks on, in this case, we're gonna try and weld as much as possible before we take the motor out, because the motor is acting as the jig. So that's the plan, and we're gonna have at it, and hopefully we will have a full frame, and then we'll start getting this bike looking like a bike again. So let's do it. All right, well, I hope you all enjoyed that welding montage. We made pretty quick work of this. Got, like I said, we were going to do most of the welding done with the motor in the frame, pulled the motor out, finished it up, and we've got ourselves a frame again. So now, at least for me, this is where the fun begins, because we get to start doing the initial mock-up assembly and starting to see what this thing's going to look like, which is my absolute favorite part. I don't know, final assembly is pretty good too, but I really like the initial mock-up stage. So before we come anywhere close to getting the motor back in the bike again, or back in the frame, I guess I should say, we're going to start working on some other stuff, and that's getting kind of everything else figured out. And we're going to start getting the motor taken apart to get the upgrades done there. So stay tuned for that in a future video. But I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about the Hardtail. So I said I was going to mention, you know, whose this is and kind of why I chose to do it. Not to leave you all in suspense, there's really no dramatic reveal. This Hardtail is from Throttle Addiction. So if you are familiar with kind of the chopper scene and the hardtail manufacturers over the last several years, at the moment there's kind of three big ones I think most people tend to look at when they're doing one of these. You've got the Throttle Addiction, Lowbrow Customs, and TC Brothers. I think there are probably pros and cons to each one of them, and I have my own pros and cons for why I wanted to do what I wanted to do, some of which would matter to you and some of which wouldn't. Namely, if all else being equal, I would have picked TC Bros. And the reason for that is I know Tim and Tyler, and I like them a lot, and I like supporting businesses of people I know. So that was my first stop of where I wanted to get the Hardtail from. But doing my due diligence, I looked around at each of the available you know, versions of it, and they're all slightly different. I would say the Lowbrow and the Throttle Addiction are probably closest to each other. And for what it's worth, a little side tangent, the Throttle Addiction Hardtail is the Hafley Brothers Hardtail from, I don't want to say back in the day, it wasn't that long ago, but as I understand it, Hafley Brothers sold the jigs and plans and patent or whatever to the guys at Throttle Addiction, and they produce what was once the Hafley Brothers design and is now the Throttle Addiction Hardtail. So if you're curious where that came from. But anyway, in looking at all three of the available ones, I picked this one for one very specific reason. There's one thing that Throttle Addiction does that the other guys don't really do, which is that in addition to selling just a bare naked hardtail, Throttle Addiction sells a kit. Now, I really didn't want to buy a kit, but I had some reasons that pushed me in that direction. This kit, and you can go to their website and see all this, it comes with a seat, a fender, a sissy bar, oil tank, battery box, kind of the big basic stuff you're going to need. I'm not going to be using a lot of the stuff that came in the kit, so it's a little bit of a waste of money, but the reason I wanted these guys' Hardtail was because of their oil tank. And the reason I say that is because usually for each of these hardtail manufacturers, they sell an oil tank that's meant to work best with their hardtail. So the Throttle Addiction oil tank is set up to fit a small anti-gravity battery inside of it. Every other hardtail, at least that I've seen, kind of other than, full custom stuff, you wind up building a battery box that goes right here in front of the rear wheel. It's how I've done it in the past. It works, it's functional, but being able to hide the battery, well, not on this side, being able to hide the battery up inside the oil tank, similar to like how a Softail would be, I loved that idea, that you couldn't see it, made all the difference in the world to me. So literally, that was the only deciding factor for me in doing this, was that I wanted that battery hidden, I wanted to run their oil tank, so if I was gonna run their oil tank, I might as well run their hardtail. Then, yes, you can just get their bare hardtail that doesn't have these mounts put on it, which is, sorry, let me explain that better. If you buy the hardtail by itself, it doesn't come with these tertiary mounts put on for the things that come in the kit, namely the fender, the rear brake, the oil tank, battery, etc., and mounts for the rear fender as well. So yeah, I could have just bought the bare hardtail, bought the oil tank, then did all the fabrication on the brackets and put these on. I mean, obviously this is not a major thing, but the way I kind of looked at it was, if you can knock out some of sort of the easy basic stuff that's not really creative or, I don't know, anything that I'm gonna lose any sleep over not doing myself, why not? Did I spend more money on it? I did, but it's gonna make some of the stuff that I don't really wanna do myself a little bit easier to get through. Like I mentioned, I have some basic welding skills, and certainly I can do little tabs and brackets and things like that. And obviously, I did not do the structural welds myself. But I figured if I can skip some of the, welding and make sure that battery box is gonna go on straight, some of that stuff, just let it get done by them and have it all be as close to perfect as possible. So I'm sure we're gonna wind up breaking the welder out again to do some other little things, and I'm glad to do it. But that's why I picked their hardtail, and that's why we wound up with this kit that comes with some of these tabs already welded on. So that's where we are. If you've got any questions about that, I'm probably not the best resource on picking a hardtail and the differences between them, but if you want, ask away in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. So from here, we've got ourselves a frame, and I want a roller. So right now, the wheels are finished at powder coat, so I've got to go pick them up. I've got to put new bearings in them. I've got to put tires on them. And then we can get our rear axle put in place, get the rear wheel put on, get the front end put back on, and will give us the first opportunity to see how much of an extension I want in the front end based on how the frame sits with the new rear frame section. So we'll kind of drop the tubes down in the triple trees, get the bike to sit where I want to sit, take a measurement, and that's the length fork tubes will run. But I hope you guys are as excited as I am to see this thing up on wheels and tires again, because this is the moment of truth, seeing that bare frame kind of with just the front end and the rear wheel. I think it's a great preview of what's to come. So stick around and let's get this thing back on wheels. All right, got my wheels back from powder coat. So today's project is going to be to get the wheels set up, get the tires put on, and hopefully get this bike back on wheels. So we got a couple of steps to do before we get these back on the bike. Obviously, these look great right back from powder coat. The wheels were in really good shape. Like I mentioned, they were just a little bit too dirty to be able to be cleaned up the way I would have liked. But who's going to complain about beautiful, fresh, gloss black 13-spoke mags? It's pretty much no bike that these won't look good on. So I'm happy to be running them just like this. So what we've got to do here is, obviously, we've got to get new bearings put back in. We've got to get valve stems put in and a couple other little things. So for me, one of the things I like to do first, very first thing, before I even start to get to put the bearings in, is just double check and make sure the wheels are good and clean before we start doing anything. So number one is just, if your bores, if your bearings aren't cleaned out, if you didn't do that before they went out to powder coat, make sure they look nice and clean, and ours are good. Obviously, any good powder coater is going to know you should not be sandblasting inside this bore, because you'll eventually oversize it and the bearings will spin or slip and spin and you ruin the wheel. So ours didn't have that happen, so we're okay. No powder coating or no sandblasting in there. One thing that's really important to do is chase through all the threads on all of these holes. The last thing you want to do is start running a bolt in there, particularly a stainless one, and have a whole bunch of like sandblasting grit or old Loctite or something like that cause it to lock up and gall, and you get a stuck bolt in your brand new wheel. So you don't want that. So you can use a regular tap if you want to, I suppose. You're better off with just like a regular thread chaser. I've already done the rear wheel, did both sides, so just go ahead and do the front wheel here. All right, so with that done, I'm just gonna blow all the dust out of here. All right, so with our threads chased and all blown out, we know we've got good threads everywhere and we're ready to keep rolling. Next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and put the valve stem in. You can reuse the old ones. I've got new aluminum ones. On these, the fronts, it's really no big deal. On the rears, the OE valve stem, the nut on there that holds it in place is a little bit tight down in this little bore that's here. It's kind of a counter bore in the wheel. A little hard to get a wrench in there. So these aluminum ones, it puts the place where you tighten it higher. They stand up a little taller. So they're just easier to get an air chuck on, and also just easier to tighten up properly. So I like these. All right. So the valve stem cores are still in. I'm going to have to take them out to make it easier to seat the bead when we put the tires on. But just to not lose track of anything, I'll just put the caps on and we'll keep rolling. So we've got bearings to go in these wheels. Just, you know, OE spec replacements. And then we've got the original spacer tubes. Obviously the shorter one is for the front, longer one for the rear. So let's go ahead and put the bearings in, I guess. All right, so with our tools set up, we should be able to just nice and even pull this bearing in. All right, first one, all good. All right, looking good. So now I'm going to do the other side. This is where I don't want to say things can get complicated, but this is where things can go awry if you're not careful. You got to make sure that it goes in straight and that your tube doesn't get cockeyed in there, which can happen. So typically what I like to do is put it in with the wheel horizontal like this, if I could sort of hold it off the end of the bench. In the case of this wheel, it's actually going to be fine. I don't even think it matters. Maybe you'll be able to see this. The hole inside this wheel fits the 3/4 inch tube pretty well, so it holds it straight. On the wheels with the bigger diameter, notably the 25mm wheel bearings, this hole is much bigger to allow for the bigger tube to go through, but what'll happen is it'll allow the tube to kind of fall like that. And if you're not careful when you're putting this together, you can get crooked and you'll press your bearing in with the crush tube like this. And obviously your axle's not going to go through and the bearing's not going to be set at the right depth. So just got to be careful of that. But in this case, I don't think we're going to have a problem. So I don't think you even really need to put any kind of lubricant inside these bores. And in truth, you don't want these bearings moving. So you don't want to, load them up with anything. I like to just put the tiniest bit, and I'm sort of rubbing it in and taking all the excess off just to make it so those bearings will just glide in, but not enough to make them, flop around in there. Not that they would, it's an interference fit, so you'll be fine, but you definitely don't want to load it up with lube. And just a little note here, I've definitely seen videos on YouTube, of people showing you that you do not need these special tools to put these bearings in. I disagree. I'm sure that, you could get just like a seal driver and hammer away on these things and get them to go in. It's not worth it. You don't want to screw up your wheel, the bores for the bearings on your wheels. The tool is expensive. It's from Jim's and it's a kit for all 3 size Harley wheels. probably not worth buying it if you are just doing one. So just bring your wheels to a shop. Any shop, if you bring them your wheel, will be willing to do it for you. You know, we've got a thing here where, you know, I don't do, you know, customer supplied parts and things like that when people bring their bikes, but somebody comes and says like, hey, I've got a wheel, I need the bearings taken out of it or bearings put in. We'll always do that because it's easy for us to do, and it's just something you should have somebody do who's got the right tools. So that's going to be my PSA for today. All right. So bearings are lined up, both spin freely. You can hear a little bit of free play on that spacer, just a little bit, and that's what we want. So this guy is perfect and ready to go. On a side note, I do have the brake rotors, both of them, and I have the pulley, or the sprocket, I guess I should say. I'm not ready to install those yet. I guess actually the front I can do. I don't have the hardware, so I kind of forgot about what I needed for these and I wasn't really paying attention. So I do have the bolts, the ARP bolts that I need for the sprocket, but I don't have washers that I like, and I don't have the bolts for the brake rotor. So the rear wheel, we'll have to come back and do those later. On the front, I'm pretty sure I've got the hardware, but maybe I'll just wait and do them all at once. But in any event, I can kind of show you this stuff now. So this is the sprocket we're running. Really nice. I like steel for chain sprockets. These are from Super Light. It's where we do most of our chain kits from. We can get all the individual pieces we need. Theirs just look really nice. They're well made, and yeah, not really much else to say about that. So they've got two styles. This is obviously one of them. And then our brake rotors are from TC Bros. These are a really good budget-friendly rotor, the TC Bros stuff. So for what it's worth is they come with the spacer. They're all compatible with it to run the rotor on a 99 and down bike with the smaller bore here. For ours, we won't need this. And this looks like a rear. So these will just slide right on. They look really nice. They do these in like a wave cut pattern also. I just decided to go with the standard round on this bike. But anyway, maybe not exactly the quality of some of the more expensive options. Like if you're looking for like a real performance-oriented rotor, look at Galfer, look at Lindell. But the TC Bros, particularly for the money, are really, really nice. So I'll use them on a lot of projects where we're kind of trying to stay within a budget. So I think that's going to work really well here. So you'll probably see these again when I put them on. I'm not sure I'll do that on camera. The hardware will come in the mail and I'll just throw the rotors on at some point. But in any event, we don't need to put the rotors and sprocket on to get the wheels on, so we'll keep moving. So at this point, oh, sorry, one other thing I forgot to show you. So I've got this piece, and this actually came from Tracker Die back in the day before they went out of business or closed up. It's just a cover for a bike that you're not gonna run dual disc rotors on. It did have a metal kind of steel piece that came on the bike, which we could use that, but this just looks kind of cool and I had it on the shelf, so we're gonna use it. I think it's fine in this like anodized matte black finish, but I would prefer it to be gloss, and I think it's got enough space in it. I can always, you know, do a little bit of filing if I need to. We could get this powder coated and we'll run it in gloss black. Now, I don't think I would spend the time or the money to go send this one piece to powder coating, but obviously we're gonna have a lot of stuff that needs to get powder coated on this bike, the frame most notably. So to throw in a couple extra parts is usually no big deal. So I'm gonna hold off on installing this and we'll get it powder coated before we put it on. So now I think we're ready to move on. This wheel is ready to go and get a tire put on it. Just have to do the bearings in the rear wheel. So let me just knock those out quickly and then we'll go over to the tire machine and take a look at some tires. All right, so I've got my rear wheel set up here, ready for the rear tire to go on. And this is what we're running for tires. These are Shinko kind of vintage style tires I just thought would be cool on this bike. I think this is a pretty, typical kind of chopper tire that a lot of people run. So what's interesting about these though, a couple of things. These are not kind of a standard size. Most of the Harley tires you run come in a metric size like 130/90, 190, whatever. These are measured in an American size. So the rear tire is a 16/5 and the front tire is a 19/4. I was looking at these tires to see if I could find a directional arrow on them and can't find any arrows. And also looking at the tread, I have a feeling that they are directionless. You can run them either way, I think. At least that's all I can come up with. But what I did notice is that these tires require tubes, which is unusual for Harley tires. Again, vintage style, things are different. So we don't need the valve stems that I put in. So I took the valve stems out and we're gonna run tubes on these wheels. Obviously on a mag, you wouldn't normally have to run a tube. Now I'd be running it with a tubeless tire. But with a tire that says it needs a tube, better safe than sorry, run a tube in it. So kind of sucks and that's annoying and it's more money to spend, but what are you gonna do? It's also kind of a pain putting a tube tire in versus the other style, or tubeless. But anyway, nothing to worry about there. I do have, obviously have a whole lot of tubes on the shelf there, but I don't have exactly the right size. I've got two that are close, so I'm hoping what I've got is gonna work. On a side note, if this was something else, like a customer bike, I would just order the right size. But given that this is for me, I'm just gonna give it a shot because, why not? I think it'll work. So anyway, let's get to putting this on and see what we come up with. I am running into the issue that I said that I had, which was this little counter bore in here. The socket doesn't fit in. So, it's interesting. Now that I have a lathe, it'd be very simple for me just to turn down the outside of this socket a little bit. That might be interesting to try that. All right, not great on the surface finish or the chip breaking, but hey, I'm new at this. Let's see what we got. All right, so just turn down the OD there a little bit. I think that's gonna be enough. Let me bring it over, do a test fit on it and see if we gotta take any more off. All right, well, it was perfectly good after the first pass, but I just couldn't leave well enough alone, and I wanted to see if I could put a little chamfer on it and maybe clean up the surface finish. And I did all that, but now I probably cut it way too thin. It's gonna work, but I don't know. This is probably not long for this world. I'm not sure if you're able to see that or not, but those walls are super thin. Anyway, hey, it was a fun little side project, right? All right, got that on. Let's continue putting the tire on. There's our tire. Let me tell you something. They don't all go that easily. All right. That looks pretty cool. Not gonna lie, I like it. So let me put this aside. Obviously the next step would be balancing. I can't imagine balancing on the rear tire of a rigid bike matters in the slightest. I'm gonna do it anyway because, you know, whatever, it just takes a little while and better safe than sorry, I guess. But I guess those of you who've got more experience with choppers than me can tell me. My guess is it's probably unnecessary. So I'll put this aside for the moment. We'll balance them both together. Let me go grab the front wheel and we'll get it brought up to where this one is. All right, there's tire number 2. That one was obviously a little bit more difficult. It's kind of like a, I don't know, I don't want to say like a, it is obviously a high sidewall, but it's got a big lip. It was very difficult, even with the tire in the drop center, to get it to come around the rim. It's a little bit more violent than I like, but we got it on, got the beads seated, so I'm gonna call it a win. And just like on the rear, couldn't find anything to indicate a direction for this tire, so we're gonna call it uni-bidirectional, whatever. And hopefully everything works out. So let's move next door to the balancer, get some weights put on these if needed, and then finally we can get these over back on the frame and start to see what this is gonna look like. $165. All right, let's see what we got. Normally with the tires we normally use, it's usually needs somewhere between 0 and 2 ounces. Let's see what this one is. Ounce and a half, pretty normal. Convert that to grams because that's the weights we use, 40 grams. Put 20 on each side, spin it again, see where we're at. All right, well, it needed the weight right at the valve stem, so unfortunately can't split it up because the weights were gonna get in the way. I mean, there's a bunch of things you could do. I could have put it on either side of the valve stem, do 10 and 10, but I just put all 40 on the other side. Doesn't really matter left to right, particularly on the rear wheels, so I'm not worried about that. Let's see if that weight is correct now. So this does happen from time to time. It's hard to get it to 0. You'll kind of be chasing it. On a rear wheel, it matters less than a front wheel. Front wheel, we want perfect. On a rear wheel, if it's off by 5 grams, that's usually okay. I don't like 10 though. So I'm gonna play with this a little bit more and see if I can figure out what we need to do. Zero I like. All right, so 25 grams on the front, that would be 1 ounce. So obviously 25, I can't split evenly left to right, but let's see where it goes. Well, pretty much right at the valve stem on this one, but it doesn't matter because the valve stem is in the middle, not on the side. So I'll put weights on both sides and see if we can get her to 0. All right, let's give it a shot. Perfection. So what I like to do on these when you get an odd number is I'll actually put an extra 5 grams on so I can do an even amount on each side. And if I'm over a little bit, when I spin it again, I can just, take one weight off rather than having to add a single weight, which is likely to fall off if it's not connected to everything else. So in this case, I put 15 on each side for a total of 30. Machine liked that, and we're good to go. So now it's time for the fun part. Let's put these on the bike. All right. All right, well, here's your kind of first look. Obviously, we gotta bring this bike up a whole bunch. So because we don't have a front wheel on, I've got 2 jacks under here, and I'm gonna try and raise them up evenly so that we don't wind up with this thing getting all tippy and wanting to fall off the table. All right, I'm liking that. All right, there's kind of a better look at it. This bike is gonna be really cool. I can already tell. All right, so in terms of getting this axle set up, you can use your stock axle with this. Stock axle spacers on the inside, so they say, we'll see. These, what I presume are laser cut holes, were undersized. I couldn't get the axle through, so I just went through with a little drum sander and opened it up a little bit more. Truth is, after it gets powder coated, I'm gonna have to do it again. So what I'm gonna try and do is after we do this mock-up, when I take this apart, I'm gonna go through and try and open up everything that's gonna get powder coat in it so that I can try to avoid taking the powder coat off if I can. We'll see how that goes, but that's my plan. Anyway, the only change versus your stock axle is because the original swing arm has width to it, and this only has, the, whatever this is, 1/4 inch of the plate, you need to make that up somehow. So what they suggest is that you can take your axle adjusters out of the swing arm, cut the ends off, and then use them as spacers on the outside. I mocked that up in there, and I didn't like it. I didn't think the spacing was exactly the way I liked it. I also was kind of like, those things are made of steel, and if you cut those adjuster ends off, it's gonna rust. So I just went and found I have some regular wheel spacers in aluminum, and I picked 2. They're not exactly the same size. I did let's see, that's the inside spacer. I don't know where the outside spacer is. Oh, this is for the left side. So this is, I think, 3/4 of an inch, and then on this side, I've got a 1/2 inch. Now, obviously, your spacing on the outside doesn't affect the inside spacing of the wheel. All you're doing is just moving where the position of the axle is. And basically what I was trying to do was get it so that the castle nut would sit down perfectly on here and I'd be lined up nicely with the adjusters. So that's how it worked out for me. So I'm trying to decide if I want to put any anti-seize on here right now. I don't think I'm going to. This is not going to be together that long. It's certainly not going to be run like this. So I think we can skip the mess for now. So on the spacer wise, so I talked at the outside, the inside, you've got a big spacer on the right side, small spacer on the left side, and your caliper. So I didn't show this on camera, but I did take the time to get this disconnected, get all the fluid bled out, cleaned it, put new brake pads in it. So this is ready to go on. So we've got a little tab over here. I'll bring the camera over here when we get to it, but this is a little piece that comes with the kit this is basically gonna create a stay for that stock caliper. And I didn't mention it earlier when I was talking about why I liked this hardtail better than the others. This one, unlike the others, is really designed to work with the later style caliper. So the other ones want you to either convert to an earlier caliper or you can do a bunch of modification. This one works really nicely with the late style caliper, and these are good calipers by comparison. So I wanted to run this caliper and this swing arm or this hardtail is probably the easiest way to do it. So other than the battery box, this was the other kind of big deciding factor for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all of our stuff lined up in here, and hopefully this axle will just slide on through. Okay, I got these axle adjusters roughly, well, not roughly, very even, roughly in the middle of the travel for the axle. Before I tighten it down though, I do want to put the brake stay on just so I can get this caliper in the right place. So this is pretty simple. It's just a bent piece of steel with some threaded holes in it, and it's just going to get bolted onto this. And what you got here, why there's this big channel, is this allows the stay to move depending on wherever you adjust the axle to. So it's not your normal kind of axle adjustment procedure. It's got a couple extra steps, but it's a chopper. That's how things go. So we're going to put that in there, and we'll thread these in. All right. Now, me personally, I would like to see flat washers under these lock washers because you got this tab here and I don't want these getting caught in that tab. But that's something to figure out kind of when we do final assembly. Certainly I'm not going to use these bolts anyway. We'll do something in stainless, maybe ARPs, you know, gotta make it look good. So I'm liking that. Let's tighten the axle, which will lock the brake into that position. Just do that. Good. And all right, snug. Can't complain about that. I dig it. That is such a simple, elegant design for a brake stay. You know, rather than a heim joint and a stay and all this other stuff, this is just so simple. I'm probably going to do a little bit of maybe cleaning up on these corners. Probably hit it with the grinder, maybe round this over a little bit. Definitely have to get this brake stay powder coated so it doesn't rust. So we got some work to do, but that's to be expected. You know, this isn't meant to be bolt on. This is something you got to figure out for yourself and make it how you want it. So, but in any event, I'm feeling good about that. I really like it. Obviously, we've got no binding in the bearings as this wheel just continues to spin. What would be nice, you know, I wish I kind of had the hardware for that brake rotor. Be nice to see at this point if the caliper is lined up, but I see no reason why the caliper would not be lined up. Everything else seems to fit perfectly, so I think we should be okay, but obviously when I get the rotor, we'll check that. So in any event, I think what I want to do here now is lower this so that the rear wheel is sitting on the table. Tighten this again. We're gonna have to loosen it again, but just for now. All right, so that's snug. That's not going anywhere. Now, what we need to do is move over to the front end and just start to get the front end put back together. So the trees and the legs, we'll get that all put out. And obviously, none of this is final assembly. I haven't changed the bearings, the races, any of that yet. I haven't even cleaned anything, to be honest with you. So all we're doing here is just putting it together so that we can take a look at kind of ride height and get a sense of what length fork tubes I want to buy. Also, turns this back into a roller, which will allow me to move it off this lift if I need to. So that's the plan. So let's get to it. All right, found my axle, and would you believe I actually kind of just, I think, guessed the height the bike needed to be sitting at to get the axle in. I think maybe almost exactly on the first shot. All right, so let's try sliding all this in. Looking good. All right. Well, this is kind of what I said I wanted to do. Was get a sense of kind of how the bike sits. So you know what? Let's back up and take a look. All right, so here it is. This is pretty much how the bike would be sitting without the jacks under it or anything. I lowered this down so the front wheel's back on the ground. Obviously the back's on the ground. So clearly this should make sense. The rear is not adjustable in any way because it's a hardtail. The front, I get to make a decision of how much I want to raise the front end. Interestingly, I had in my head like +4, +6, somewhere in there. Definitely we're not doing +6, I can tell you that already. What's funny is when I take a step back, I actually really like the way that it sits right now. I guess let's try it. Let's try a couple things. Let's set this up maybe 2 ways, maybe 3 ways. So we've got one here, which is stock, obviously. I'm gonna raise it up 2 inches. We'll see what that looks like. And maybe we'll raise it to 4 just to see, but my guess is that 2 might be it. I don't know. I do like a 4-over front end, but I don't know. Let's try it out. Okay, so I loosened up the triple tree, marked the forks at 2 inches and 4 inches, and with the front wheel grabbed in the vise, we should be able to lift this up, I'm hoping, and be able to kind of see what it's going to look like at +2 and +4. Obviously, it's not going to be connected on the top, but that doesn't matter for our purposes right now. At least I don't think it does. So let's see what happens. I am going to just throw this strap back on just a little bit so it's here just in case. I don't think we need it, but better safe than sorry. When you start jacking the bike up like this, certainly with no, ability to put it in gear or anything like that, you go up too high and this thing could just roll right off the back of the lift. So we obviously don't want that to happen. All right, actually, I'm gonna have to probably loosen that a little. All right, let's see what happens. Look at that. Easy. Is the other side going up too? Yes. What's going on here? Is the rear starting to come up? Is it getting caught in the... There we go. And this side looks good too. All right. All right, so it's not on the jack anymore. And weight's on the forks. All right, so there is our +2. Let's take a look. I definitely like that. I definitely like the look of having a longer front end. It's not too crazy in terms of, lift or rake angle. Just make sure this is still sitting, yeah. Yeah, +2, definitely good. So let's see what +4 looks like, right? I'm hoping +4 looks good because I'd like to see a long front end on here. Oh, before we loosen that, gotta put the jack back under. Okay. All right, take the jack down. All right, let's see how we look. Yeah, it just keeps getting better and better, doesn't it? Yeah, I think it's +4. We could go up to +6 and see what it looks like, but I think +4 is the one. I mean, you can tell it's got some lift here. Obviously you're seeing that line, you're seeing that line. I could throw the tank on. I mean, it's not gonna be in the final position, but I could put it up there and just throw this bolt in to hold it. That would just be kind of cool, but I don't know. So, yeah, I don't know. Let's, whatever, just for shits and giggles, let's do +6. Okay, release the jack. All right, so there's +6. Well, that's cool, but I think it's too much. I think +4 is the number. So, not making any decisions right now. So you all tell me what you think. We saw stock, +2, +4, and +6. Let me know what you think. I'm thinking it's +4. I think that's the one. Maybe +2, I don't know. But I think +4 might be the happy medium. Still give you that chopper look, give you that longer front end, but still, you know, a reasonable stance for the bike. All right, well, I couldn't help myself. I just had to put the tank on to see what it was gonna look like. Obviously, the 100th anniversary is sort of the whole thing of this chopper. So putting this tank on kind of makes me start to see what this is gonna look like. Now, I know I mentioned before, this may or may not be the tank that I run. If we run a different one, we'll make it look exactly like this one in terms of the decals and the badge. But I'm just not sure about how I want to mount the tank. I know there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. I'm not really happy with any of the kind of off-the-shelf, like super low tunnel Frisco mount tanks. I don't really like this sunk all the way down. I'm kind of trying to do something in between. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what I want to do and what the best way to do that is. So I'm going to figure that out. But in the meantime, you can get a kind of a sense of kind of how this is starting to come together. I think it's going to be really cool. And I know I said I was wanting to do the wheels and polished, but you know, I was happy with the black. Now looking at it, I'm beyond happy with the black. This bike is gonna look mean when it's done. This is gonna be an angry little bike. With the motor we put in here, a bunch of black and chrome contrasting each other, I think it's gonna be super cool. But in any event, I think this is really all I can do or wanna do for today. I wanted to get the bike back to being a roller. It is. I put the kickstand back on. I did that off camera just so that I could pull the bike off the lift and go park it somewhere. But really, the next step would be, you know, for your normal build here, would be to put the motor back in and then start to kind of fab everything else up around it. Or maybe not put the motor right back in right away, but start to work on all this stuff and, you know, put motor in is what I'm trying to get at. But in my case, we've got motor work to do, so I'm gonna be disassembling the motor, the whole top end anyway, and cam chest, all that stuff. So probably gonna get on that next. So the next video we do on this, not sure when it's gonna be, but the next video will probably be on the motor. And I'll let this sit for a while so I can get the heads sent out on the motor so we can get the clock ticking on getting those parts back. Because once that motor is done, we'll be able to put it back into the bike to be able to finish the mock-up. Now, we're a long ways away from the finish line. I still have a bunch of things I need to figure out. Some of the things I'm gonna have to order. The tank is only one of them. I'm still trying to figure out what I wanna do for a pipe. There's still a few things on the punch list, but we definitely have a bunch of stuff we can work on either while the motor is out or the heads are out being worked on or afterwards, depending on how much customer work we've got here. We have to get the fender mounted up, the battery box, oil tank, kind of all that stuff, figure out, you know, wiring. We got a bunch of work we can do. So I'm excited about it. And like I said, I'm really into working on this right now. You know, I know I said I was going to be kind of doing these in between other things, and this is probably 2 in a row on this project on the channel, but I'm just into it, so we're cranking away. But there might be a little bit of a break between this one and the next one. But please let me know what you think about the front end height. I know I said before that I was I was thinking 4 + 4. I'm thinking now, after looking at it again, I'm either at +2 or +4. I think I can rule out 0 and +6, but I'm having trouble deciding between +2 and +4. So let me know what you guys think. I'd really be interested to know. And in addition to that, of course, if you're liking the series, give me a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, do all the good YouTube algorithm stuff. Really helpful to the channel, trying to grow it. So if you like it, please help so more people see it. But I think other than that, that's gonna be it for this video, and we'll see you on the next one. So thanks for watching.